You're late. You're in a rush. You grab your keys and go without checking directions. Was it a left or a right? A wrong turn, and suddenly you're somewhere you shouldn't be. Tonight, we'll hear stories where a single mistake could cost you. An aid worker nearly carjacked in South Africa. A woman attacked in Korea. A missionary in Ecuador who wished they could just go home. And a man who got off at the wrong exit. These are wrong turn stories you can get lost in. Back in 2005, I was working for a small NGO, delivering aid to villages in South Africa. The pay was terrible, but the work was worth it. To see a child's face light up by getting a bottle of fresh drinking water is beyond gratifying. We had our usual routes we'd run every week. Each one was planned, so we were out in the morning and back in the afternoon. The supplies were the usual: food, some medicine/vaccinations, and educational material. Our station was in Ulandi in Zululand. There were 2 4-man crews that operated there. We'll call them Crew A, B, C, and D. A went north, B would go west, C to the east, and D went south. There were 4 aid workers and 4 locals who were our drivers and interpreters. Along with that, there was a small administration crew of 6 people. They stayed back and coordinated stuff, did the paperwork, that sort of thing. There was one time when the flu had come through and everyone was getting sick, that Crew C plus my driver were knocked out. After seeing how long it took people to recover from this strain of flu, admin decided to split Crew C's route between the rest of us. A took the northern part of it, D took the middle, and I was given the southern part. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I think admin had the notion it split the work evenly. John, that was his English name, was going to be my driver. He was new but had grown up in the area. He hadn't been on the route before and was still in training. Another one of the drivers was leaving due to health reasons. John was really nice and had a great sense of humor. As we were loading up, he was already making jokes and being super helpful. We finished packing for the day plus some extra and headed out. The first part of the run was great. John was driving like a pro and knew some shortcuts that shaved off about an hour from the usual path. Right before noon, we swung around to pick up the southern part of Crew C's route. Red dirt kicked up from the tires when we went off the paved roads to head back east. John assured me that this way was a lot quicker. The roads were narrow back there, with only enough space for 1 car at a time. There were moments we pulled off into the brush to let others pass. Thankfully, we had a 4x4 because some of the mud holes would have had us stuck. Once noon hit, I tried to call back to admin to let them know where we were. Cell service was spotty at best, and the call kept getting dropped. Priority was the clinics and schools. Some of the homesteads would have to wait until Crew C was feeling better. With John's driving, we were able to finish up around 2. That would give us plenty of time to wrap up the rest of our usual route and make it back to base before 5. With all the distance we had saved, we figured we'd refuel once we made it back to the western section. John asked how I felt about rough roads. I told him that was fine. He said he knew another shortcut that would save even more time, but the ride was pretty bumpy. At this point, I trusted John to take me anywhere. So we jumped back off the paved roads and went deep into the bush. Half an hour passed. Normally we'd see villages, homesteads, or grazing cows. But here, only tall grass and clumps of trees stretched out before us. It didn't feel right, but I didn't say anything yet. When it hit 4 o'clock, I finally asked where we were. John reassured me we were almost there. If this was a shortcut, it had taken half an hour longer than the usual way. I pulled out the map we kept in the glove box. It did me little use. I couldn't figure out where we were. My cell phone had zero coverage out there, so I couldn't even call back to base to let them know we were lost. Finally, I snapped at John and said he didn't know where we were. He admitted it. He said he could get us back, but he had to find a landmark. I didn't even know what that could have been. There were only small rock outcrops and tree groves. When I looked over, I noticed we only had a quarter of a tank of gas left. Great. We were going to be stranded in the savannah, and no one would know where to send help. Panic hit me full face, and I started to freak out a bit. John pulled over to let me compose myself and think. I heard the wind blowing through the grass and took a deep breath. Judging by the sun, we had been going west, the way we should be going, but we must have been too far south. We had crossed one river, but not a second. I pulled out the map and figured we could be in one or two locations depending on how far we had gone and the angle. That didn't help too much. Either we had to keep going the same way and we would hit a paved road soon, or we had to turn and go north and we would find a village. We only had enough gas to go one direction. The right decision would get us to safety. The wrong one would leave us stranded. I chose north since Ulundi was that direction anyways. John turned around and started heading back the way we came, but turned off from going east to going straight north. Shortly after, I could see a village coming up on our right. It seemed like north was the right call. The only problem was, when we got closer, I didn't see any smoke from cooking fires, animals, or people walking about. My heart sank a little as I realized we found an abandoned homestead and not our salvation. A little further down the road, and there were logs placed strangely on both sides. I could see John tighten his grip on the steering wheel. He didn't say anything, but I could tell the logs guiding us down the road made him nervous. Just past the logs, there was a vehicle on the road sideways blocking our path. John slowed down and started saying something in Zulu to himself. His head was spinning back and forth. He was looking for something, but I didn't know what. I was about to ask him when I saw it. 3 men came from behind the car around to the front. It took me a second to notice, but they were holding rifles in their hands. I said a few creative phrases, but John was cool. His eyes narrowed and darted around. The logs were blocking us in, so he couldn't turn. John told me to hold on and threw the car in reverse. Dirt spit up, creating a cloud of dust. That was probably for the best, so I couldn't see the men when the shot went off. John pushed my head down and was looking backwards. I glanced at the side mirror and saw a 4th man coming up from behind. John didn't even slow down. The man must have gotten out of the way before we hit him. There was no thud or bump. Once we cleared the logs, John whipped the steering wheel around. I'm pretty sure we came up on 2 tires for a moment. We landed with a thud and John slammed on the gas. He finally let me get back up, but told me to be careful. We weren't safe yet. The back window shattered when another round was fired. I let out a yelp. John stayed cool. Chancing a look back, I saw the truck that had been in the road was now chasing us. My head was knocked on the roof a time or two as we took the bumps at full speed. It was only luck we didn't break an axle. There were no more gunshots, but if we didn't make it back to a road before we ran out of gas, it wasn't going to be pretty. That must have been the longest 15 minutes of my life. Once I saw that black strip of a paved road in front of us, I was finally able to breathe again. But there was traffic. Even this close to civilization, if we had to stop to merge, those men would be alongside us in seconds. I could feel the truck slow a bit, but not stop. The timing was perfect. John gunned it and turned onto the road, barely missing a semi, and got into the far lane in between 2 other cars. That man has to have ice in his veins. One last look back, and the pursuing truck had stopped at the edge of the road. About 3 miles further, and we were on the shoulder. The gas tank was empty. My cell phone worked now, so I called admin and they sent someone with a gas can to fill us up. They split up Route C and gave it to A and D instead. I got my usual route back until C was better. They told John he couldn't take any more shortcuts if he wanted to keep his job. I don't blame John for what happened. He was trying to be efficient and help out. I worked there for a couple more years before the NGO lost funding. John was my driver the rest of the time. He never did stop apologizing for that day. Every once in a while, I'll still have a bad dream or a sudden flash of panic when I think I'm lost. Nothing that isn't manageable. I'm really glad John was with me that day. He kept his composure and drove like a pro. It could have happened to anyone, but not everyone could have gotten out of it like he did. Back in my 20s, I was living in South Korea teaching English. I could talk all day about how much I love that country, but I won't bore you with all of that. I had met my boyfriend, who's now my husband, while I was there. He was in the army, and at the time he was stateside. I was going to follow him back the next month. The night this happened, I was coming back late from hanging out with some friends. I took the last train to get back to my place. Unfortunately, I fell asleep and missed my stop. Luckily, I woke up 2 stops later. It wasn't so far off that I couldn't walk, but I wasn't as familiar with this part of the city. Still, I knew the direction I needed to go, and if I walked that way, I would make it home. Cabs cost money, and I had spent my cash, so a taxi was out of the question. Korea is a crazy place, and most parts are 24/7 where traffic and people never stop moving. The way back took me through an industrial area, and the closer I got to it, the more everything thinned out. Pretty soon, there was no one on the street with me. I was getting a little spooked, so I called my boyfriend to have someone to talk to. It was kind of early in the morning where he was, but he picked up. We were talking and whatnot when I noticed someone was behind me. They were maybe 3 or 4 feet back. I could see their shadow to my left, and I figured they'd turn our path soon. For some reason, I got the feeling he was following me. To test that feeling out, I stopped to tie my shoe. The man went past, and I felt a little relief. While still talking to my boyfriend, I continued on my walk. Only the man in front now slowed down and lit a cigarette. My senses were tingling, and a little alarm went off. Soon I could feel chicken skin on the back of my neck. I saw a shadow again telling me he was close. One more time I stopped and pretended I was getting something out of my pocket. He walked by. When I started to walk again, I was going slower. The man in front slowed down too, and was only about 2 paces ahead of me. I'm telling my boyfriend this guy is making me nervous. When the guy in front turns around, my reaction was instantaneous. Still not sure what told me what he was going to do, but I saw it before it happened. I tightened up for impact and felt his fist slam into my stomach. Shock washed through me, and I dropped my phone. Before the man could make another move, my left hand reacted on its own. Without a thought, I swung as hard as I could and connected with his nose. The guy dropped like a sack of rocks. I don't think I knocked him out, just caught him off guard. Rage boiled over, and I started to kick his legs and call him names. Inside, I was screaming at myself to run. It took a minute, but I grabbed my phone and sprinted down the street. 2 blocks later, I stopped and looked back. The street was empty except for the man still laying on the ground. Honestly, I probably hurt his ego more than anything else, but maybe I did knock him out. I never bothered to check. I ran a little further until things looked familiar again. Once I was in a place I recognized, I went down some side streets in case I was being followed. My poor boyfriend. The last thing he heard before I dropped the phone was me screaming after telling him I was being stalked. The phone had hung up when it hit the ground, and he had no clue what had happened. When I got back to my apartment, I called him and told him what had gone down. He was so freaked out, talking about how he didn't know how to call the police in Korea to get help, also told me how proud he was of me and he was glad I was safe. I don't want anyone to think this is a normal thing in Korea. It's not. The people are friendly and normally the place is super safe. It just goes to show when you take a wrong turn and end up where you usually don't go, anything can happen. Back in 2015, I was doing missionary work in Ecuador. I'd been there about 8 months at that point, working with a small organization that helped establish churches in remote villages. The work was challenging but rewarding. Most of our efforts were in areas that had little to no Christian presence, and we'd work with local communities to set up what we called seed churches, basically small meeting places in the framework for a congregation to grow. That particular week, we were headed to a village deep in the jungle, about 3 hours outside of Quito. The plan was simple. Our lead vehicle had Marco, our interpreter, and would guide us to the village. I'd be driving our truck with supplies, some building materials, Bibles, and basic tools. And my passenger was Ryan, a new guy from Canada who'd only been in country about 2 weeks. Ryan was mid-20s, eager to help, but his Spanish was pretty much non-existent. Mine wasn't much better. We left Quito around 8 a.m. The first hour was fine. I stayed right behind Marco's truck through the city and onto the highway. But once we hit the outskirts, traffic got thick. There was some kind of accident or construction. I never found out which. Cars were weaving between lanes, motorcycles zipping through gaps. We got separated. 1 minute Marco's taillights were right there, and the next they were gone. I wasn't too worried at first. I pulled out my Garmin GPS, one of the old ones where you had to load the maps onto it, and punched in the village coordinates Marco had given us that morning. The route popped up. I told Ryan we'd be fine, that we'd probably beat Marco there if we just followed the GPS. Cell service was spotty out there anyway, mostly only worked in the cities, so calling wasn't really an option. We followed the GPS for about an hour. The paved road gave way to dirt, then to something that was barely a road at all. The jungle pressed in thick on both sides. Ryan kept checking his phone but had 0 bars. I tried to stay confident, and the GPS kept saying we were on course, so we pushed forward. That's when we saw the barricade. It was made of logs and an old metal gate pushed off to the side of the road. There was a faded sign in Spanish that neither of us could read. I slowed down and looked at it. The barricade was clearly moved aside on purpose. I figured it was probably put up because of the heavy rains we'd had the week before. Flooding and mudslides were common. Since it was moved, the road had to be passable now, so we kept going. A little ways later, we came to what looked like a village. But as we got closer, something seemed not right. The buildings looked new, but things looked unfinished. Metal roofs, wooden walls that looked hastily constructed, things like that. There were no people around, no kids playing, no lights on, and no animals. Simply empty structures and dirt paths between them. Some of the buildings had graffiti spray painted on the sides. Ryan asked what it said, but I had no idea. I drove slowly through, both of us looking for any sign of life. Past the village, the road just disappeared. Trees and undergrowth swallowed where the path should have been. I stopped the truck and checked the GPS. That's when I noticed the little message at the bottom of the screen. Map date 2012. The roads hadn't been updated in 3 years. Ryan and I got out to look around to see if there was an alternate path, or if we could find someone in the village to ask directions. That's when we heard the shouting, men's voices coming from the woods to our left. They were angry and getting closer. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. We weren't welcome. We ran back to the truck. I started the engine and turned around. But when we got back to where we'd entered, the barricade had been put back across the road. heavy logs in the gate locked into place. Men came out of the jungle, 6 or 7 of them, maybe more. They surrounded the truck before I could even think about ramming through. They yanked open the doors and pulled us out. They were shouting in Spanish, waving machetes and work tools in our face. One guy had a gun tucked in his belt. I kept trying to explain in English. We're missionaries, we're lost and took a wrong turn. But no one understood or cared. Ryan was trying too, his voice shaking. They tied our hands behind our backs with rope and marched us into one of the buildings we'd seen earlier. We were shoved into a small room with a dirt floor. 2 guards stayed with us. One of them kept getting in my face, jabbing his finger at my chest and saying things I couldn't understand. The other guard said something sharp to him a few times, seemed to be telling him to back off. We sat there for at least 2 hours, maybe 3. My mind was racing through every terrible possibility. Ryan looked terrified, his face pale. The aggressive guard kept taunting us, making throat-cutting gestures and things like that. The other one mostly watched. Finally, a new person came in. Older guy, maybe 50, with a weathered face. He spoke English. He asked us who we were. His voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. He offered us some water, which we drank. Then the questions started. Who did we work for? What company sent us? Why were we really there? We told him everything. The missionary organization, getting separated from our guide, following the GPS and the wrong turn. He didn't believe us. He kept asking the same questions in different ways, like he was trying to catch us in a lie. One of the guards hit Ryan across the face. I started talking faster, explaining again, but our story didn't change because it was the truth. The interpreter left and came back with another man who looked like he was in charge. They talked in Spanish for a minute. Then the interpreter said they were going to search our truck. If they found anything that proved we were lying, we weren't going to be making it out of there. He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather. They left us there for another hour. The cruel guard seemed pleased and kept smirking at us. The other one looked almost sympathetic. Ryan and I didn't talk much. I prayed more in that hour than I had in months. When the interpreter came back, his expression had changed. He said they'd searched the truck and found only Bibles, crosses, and building supplies. He asked a few more questions about our organization and about the village we were trying to reach. Then he left again. He came back 20 minutes later and said we were free to go, but we had to leave our phones and the GPS. He also said, and I'll never forget this, that they knew what we looked like. They had people everywhere, and that if we went to the police in the next few days, they would find us. Then he smiled and said he hoped we understood. They blindfolded us and put us back in our truck. The second guard, the one who tried to keep the other one off of us, got in and drove for maybe 30 minutes. Then he stopped, took off our blindfolds, and walked back into the jungle without saying a word. We didn't see which direction he went. It took us almost 4 more hours to find our way back. We had no GPS, no phones, just the sun and my questionable sense of direction. Ryan barely spoke the whole time. Eventually, we found a small village, a real one, and managed to communicate enough with an old man that he pointed us back toward the main road. We made it back to Quito after dark. We reported it to our organization, but not to the police. The interpreter had been clear about the consequences, and we were kind of scared. Our organization sent someone else to the village we'd been trying to reach. It took us another month to line things up, but we did eventually make it there ourselves and help set up the church. Ryan stayed on for another 6 months before heading back to Canada. We still email sometimes. I'm back in the States now, been back for almost 8 years, but I still think about that day. about how a simple wrong turn put us face to face with people we had no business meeting. We heard from others it was probably an illegal logging operation. That's what we'd stumbled into. They weren't going to kill us. They just needed time to pack up and move on. Still, I thank God for keeping us safe. I'll never forget the feeling of being tied up in that room, not knowing if I'd see another day. Or the look on that one guard's face when he kept making those gestures. Or the interpreter's calm voice, explaining what would happen if we talked. I still do missionary work, but I've never been back to Ecuador. If it happens, it happens, but it's not on my priority list. I was driving cross-country for a job interview in Cleveland. It was my first time doing a long haul like that by myself, and I'd been on the road for about 6 hours when things went sideways. I was somewhere outside of Chicago, still on the interstate, when my car started making this weird stuttering noise. The engine would rev and then drop, rev and drop. My check engine light came on and I knew I needed to get off the highway before I ended up stalled in the middle of traffic. I took the next exit without really thinking about it. My phone's GPS was acting up, so I couldn't look up service stations while driving. I figured I'd see a gas station or something right off the ramp. That's usually how it works. The area looked normal enough at first. Residential streets, a few small businesses that were closed. Nothing that screamed danger. But as I drove looking for somewhere to pull over, I started noticing the houses were getting more run down. Boarded up windows, overgrown yards, a couple places that were straight up abandoned with no trespassing signs. My car started acting worse, so when I saw a cracked asphalt parking lot next to what used to be a convenience store, I pulled in. The store had been gutted, windows covered with plywood. Looking around, I realized pretty much every house on the block was in the same shape. The whole area felt empty in a way that made my skin crawl. I popped the hood and got out, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. I'm not a car guy, so I just stared at the engine for a few minutes like that would help. Everything looked fine to me, not that I'd know the difference. When I got back in and tried to start it, the engine would turn over but wouldn't catch. Just that clicking sound that tells you you're screwed. I called my insurance roadside assistance and explained where I was. The woman on the phone said they'd send a tow truck but couldn't give me a time estimate. She said I'd get a text when someone was on the way. So I settled in to wait, doors locked, windows up despite the heat. That's when I noticed two guys walking down the sidewalk across the street. They looked over at my car but kept walking. I went back to playing a game on my phone, trying not to think about how isolated I felt. About 10 minutes later, I got the text. Tow truck ETA, 30 minutes. I felt a wave of relief. Half an hour wasn't that long. Then I saw the same two guys walk past again, going the opposite direction. One of them stopped and just stood there on the sidewalk, watching my car. I pretended not to notice and kept my eyes on my phone, but I was watching him out of the corner of my eye. After a few minutes of that, he walked off in the direction his friend had gone. Maybe 5 minutes passed. Then the one who'd been staring came back, and this time he had 3 new guys with him I hadn't seen before. There were 4 total now. They stood on the opposite side of the street, and I could see them talking, occasionally looking over at my car. This was beginning to make me nervous. One of them broke away from the group and started walking toward me. He got about halfway across the street, then stopped and went back. I watched them argue for a bit, the other 3 gesturing at my car. They practically pushed him back towards the street. He started crossing again, took a few steps and then turned back. Crossed again, stopped. He kept doing this weird back and forth thing like he was working up the nerve for something. I locked my doors, not that they weren't already locked. but I hit the button again just to hear it. I needed the reassurance, I guess. Finally, he made up his mind and went straight to my driver's side window. He knocked on the glass. I looked at him but didn't roll down the window. He started asking questions through the glass. Did I need help? What was wrong with my car? Stuff like that. His tone was friendly, but something about it betrayed him. It was more like he was reading lines than showing concern. I glanced past him. His 3 friends were still across the street watching. "I'm waiting for someone," I said through the window, loud enough for him to hear. He turned around and yelled to his friends what I just said. One of the others jogged across the street. Now there were 2 of them right next to my car. The new guy started asking who I was waiting for, saying maybe they knew him and that they could go get him if he lived around there. I told them it was fine, I didn't need help. But they kept insisting, talking over each other about how they could help, how they knew everyone in the neighborhood. Then the second guy lifted his shirt, just for a second, just enough for me to see the black grip of a gun tucked in his waistband. "You need to get out," he finally said. Everything in my body went cold. For a split second, I actually considered it. Unlocking the door, getting out, letting them take my wallet, my phone, whatever they wanted. My mind was convincing me that would be more safe than staying in the car and arguing. But I hesitated, and that hesitation must have pissed them off, because suddenly they were yanking on my door handle and banging on the window. The guy without the gun started hitting the glass with his palm, and I was sure it was going to break any second. I don't know what I would have done. I really don't. Then I saw the tow truck turn onto the street. They saw it too. All 4 of them scattered immediately, running in different directions. The 2 across the street were gone in seconds. The 2 by my car took off toward the abandoned houses. The tow truck driver pulled up and got out, completely oblivious to what had just happened. "Hey man, what's going on with your car?" he said. I couldn't even answer him at first. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock the door. I've thought about it a lot since then. If that tow truck had been 5 minutes later, or if they'd gotten my door open, or if I'd actually stepped out of the car, I'm not sure what would have happened. I was lucky. That's all it was. Pure luck that the timing worked out. Funny how things like that happen. Seriously, someone above must have been looking out for me. That's all I can say on why that didn't end up worse than it did. And I keep thinking about that guy doing the back and forth thing in the street. Like even he knew what they were about to do was wrong, but he did it anyway. You have been watching Noir, a Radion production brought to you by Trapper Dan, the finest in canned survival food.